The radio crackled twice, then went silent. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reeves stood at the edge of the operations deck, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee she hadn't touched in 2 hours. Through the thick glass of the forward observation post, she could see the gray water of the Arabian Sea moving slow and heavy under a sky the color of ash. The sun had not fully risen. The horizon was a thin red line, like a wound that hadn't healed. "Ma'am," Petty Officer Diaz appeared at her shoulder. He was young, 22 maybe, with careful eyes that always looked like they were doing math. Thermal imaging picked up 3 contacts, small hulls, low profile, moving nor-northeast at 14 knots. Sarah set the cup down without drinking from it. Distance: 4 nautical miles. They adjusted heading twice in the last 20 minutes, not a fishing pattern. She already knew the way they moved, the hour, the silence on their radios. She knew before she asked the next question. Any response to our hails? Channel 16, military channel, nothing. She turned away from the window. Behind her, the Combat Information Center hummed with the quiet intensity of people who understood that quiet could end at any second. 12 operators, 4 screens each, tracking signals and contacts and communication logs with the practiced stillness of people trained never to flinch at what they saw. But you could feel it in the room. You could feel the particular kind of tension that comes not from fear of the unknown, but from knowing something and hopping you're wrong. Sarah walked to the main display. The 3 contacts glowed soft orange against the blue of the sea chart. She watched them for a moment. They were not fishing vessels. Fishing vessels didn't move like that. Fishing vessels didn't go dark on radio at 4 in the morning while changing course twice toward a Pakistani naval frigate conducting a routine coastal patrol near the Makran coastline. She keyed her headset. "Bridge, this is Reeves. I need Captain Karami." There was a pause, then the voice of Captain Tariq Karami came through, level and unhurried the way it always was, even when things were burning. "I'm here, Lieutenant Commander. Talk to me." 3 contacts, sir, moving to intercept. No radio response. Thermal profile suggests possible smuggling configuration, but the formation and speed are not consistent with a single-interest operation. They're organized. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear the captain moving, the sound of footsteps on the bridge deck. How long until intercept range? At current speed, 18 minutes, less if they accelerate. Has the warning been transmitted? Standard maritime warning on 16 plus military frequency. No acknowledgement. Karami's voice was quiet when he said, "Send the last warning, Lieutenant Commander, one more time, every channel we have. I want it logged, time-stamped, and I want every second of what follows recorded." She felt the weight of that word, last, not because it was a dramatic word, because it was a precise one. This is what they do not show you in the movies, the paperwork of war, the documentation of the moment before things change. The last warning is not a speech, it is a timestamp. It is a record that says, "We tried, we gave them every chance, we followed every rule. What happens next is not our choice." Diaz was already typing. She heard the transmission go out, clean, professional, without emotion. "Vessel or vessels approaching Pakistani naval frigate at grid position November Kilo 7. You are entering a restricted military zone. Identify yourself immediately. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. This is your final warning." She looked at the screen. The 3 orange contacts did not slow down. They did not change course. They did not respond. If you are watching this for the first time, stay with it. This story is going to take you somewhere most war stories don't go. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good moment to do it, because what happens in the next hour of that morning will change how you think about what bravery actually costs. The contacts accelerated. Sarah looked at Diaz. He was already looking at her. His face said nothing, which was itself a kind of language. "Battle stations," she said. The alarm was not loud. It was not the screaming klaxon of action movies. It was a controlled, rhythmic tone that moved through the ship like a pulse, and everyone who heard it knew exactly what it meant and exactly what to do. Training does that to you. It replaces panic with muscle memory. It converts fear into procedure. And in the seconds after that alarm sounded, 47 sailors on PNS Shirtle moved with the particular efficiency of people who had rehearsed this enough times that their bodies did not need their minds to lead. Sarah was already moving through the corridor, down the portside gangway, toward the weapons station where Petty Officer First Class Hamza Malik stood with his team at the deck gun, strapped in, ready, faces unreadable. She had worked with Hamza for 11 months. He was 38 years old, built like a door, and had the stillness of someone who had seen enough close things that ordinary movement seemed wasteful to him. He spoke slowly. He shot accurately. He had once disarmed a man using only a flashlight and a calm voice. She trusted him completely, which was not something she said easily. 3 contacts, she said. They didn't stop. I know, he said. He was watching the water. The first light of morning was just beginning to separate the sea from the sky. The air smelled of salt and diesel, and something metallic she had learned to associate with the time before things happen. She had smelled it before, once in the Strait of Hormuz, once off the coast near Gwadar, and once during a training exercise that stopped being a training exercise for about 90 seconds before someone realized the contact was a fishing vessel with a broken transponder. That time, nothing happened. She had not forgotten the smell. The contacts were visible now, not clearly, but enough. 3 low-hulled craft, dark against the water, moving in a shallow triangle formation. Professional spacing. Someone had taught them that. Captain Karami's voice came through the ship wide. This is the captain. We have been approached by 3 unidentified vessels that have failed to respond to repeated warnings, including a final maritime warning transmitted on all available channels. I am authorizing defensive action. Weapons free on my command. All personnel stay sharp. The word weapons free has a particular effect on people who know what it means. It doesn't cause panic. It causes a very specific kind of clarity. Suddenly everything in your field of vision becomes precise. The distance to the contacts, the angle of approach, the light changing on the water, the sound of your own breathing. Sarah raised her binoculars. The lead craft was perhaps 800 meters out now. She could see figures, 4, maybe 5 per vessel, seated low, moving with purpose. Then the lead vessel opened fire. The first burst was short, automatic. It hit the water 30 meters off the port bow, which was either a warning or very bad aim. Sarah already knew which one it was because the second burst was longer and it hit the railing just forward of her position, and she felt the impact through the deck plates under her feet. Weapons free, Karami said, calm, like he was ordering tea. Hamza did not hesitate. The deck gun fired, once, twice. The lead vessel's engine section erupted and the craft slewed hard to the left and stopped moving forward. The 2 flanking vessels broke formation, one accelerating toward the stern and one banking hard to create separation. Sarah was already on the radio. Contact 2 is moving to our stern. Contact 3 is breaking east. Recommend intercept heading and suppression fire on Contact 2. The response from the bridge was immediate. The ship adjusted. Schertle was a Zulfiqar-class frigate, not a fast attack craft, but the helmsman moved her with a competence that closed the angle on the second vessel before its crew had fully processed the situation. But the third vessel had done something unexpected. Instead of running, it had turned directly toward the ship, not toward the stern, not toward an angle of approach, directly at them, full speed, which meant either its crew had panicked or they had always intended this, or there was something on that vessel that was meant to reach the side of the ship at full speed. Sarah understood this in approximately 1 second. Bridge, Contact 3 is a direct approach vessel, possible VBIED or breaching craft. Recommend immediate suppression, all available. She was already moving toward Hamza, pointing at the third contact. Full suppression, don't stop. Hamza tracked and fired. The rounds were landing close, but the craft was fast and low and the angle was closing quickly. 200 meters, 150. And then something happened that Sarah had not expected, which was a feeling she did not like and would not forget. A figure appeared at the stern of the approaching craft, standing, not firing, arms out to the sides. For a single second that felt much longer, Sarah and this figure were visible to each other across the narrowing water. She recognized the posture. She had seen it once before in a training file she'd studied 3 years ago at the Naval War College in Lahore. It was not the posture of a man about to detonate something. It was the posture of a man who wanted to be seen clearly before someone decided to shoot him. Hold, she said. Hamza looked at her. His hands did not move. Ma'am. Hold 10 seconds. This was the moment her superior officers would later examine with the most intensity. This was the decision she would explain 3 separate times to 3 separate review boards. This was the moment she hesitated. She will tell you herself that it was not instinct. It was not training. It was something she still cannot name clearly. A reading of a posture across 120 meters of early morning water that told her something was not what it appeared to be. The craft slowed. Not stopped, slowed enough that the angle of impact, if it continued, would not be a full strike. The figure at the stern dropped to one knee, hands visible, something in one hand that was not a weapon, something flat, something held out. Sarah keyed the bridge. Contact 3 is slowing and showing possible signal. Request hold on suppression for identification. There was silence for exactly 4 seconds. Then Karami said, "You have 60 seconds, Lieutenant Commander, not one more." She grabbed a megaphone from the rack behind Hamza. This was not protocol. Protocol was radio on established channels. Protocol was the process they had already followed completely. What she was doing now was outside protocol, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. "Vessel approaching our port side, stop your engines. Identify yourself immediately. You have 60 seconds. The craft's engine sound dropped. It was coasting now, 50 meters. The figure remained at the stern, one knee down, holding the flat object overhead with both hands. 30 meters. She could see his face now, mid-30s, dark jacket, a beard that was several weeks old. He was not afraid. That was the thing she noticed most. He was exhausted and he was focused and he was not afraid. 20 meters. Stop your engine, she said again. Now. The engine cut. The craft drifted. It bumped gently against the hull of the Shuttle and stopped. The flat object the man was holding, Sarah could now see, was a folder, waterproofed, military issue, Pakistani naval intelligence markings on the visible tab. Her hands were steady when she gestured to Hamza's team to bring the man aboard. Her voice was steady when she informed Captain Karami that Contact 3 had halted and requested boarding. Her face was steady through the whole process of getting the man over the rail, hands visible, 2 weapons trained on him at all times. The folder surrendered to her directly. But inside, she was running through the last 20 minutes, examining every decision, every second she had held fire, and asking herself which version of this she was living in. The one where her hesitation saved something, or the one where her hesitation had cost them everything and the consequences simply hadn't arrived yet. The man's name was Lieutenant Commander Asad Mahmood, Pakistan Navy Special Operations. He had been undercover in a narcotics and weapons distribution network operating from the Makran coast for 6 months. The 2 vessels that had attacked them, the ones that fired and were fired upon, were run by the network's security arm. People who had been watching Asad for weeks, who had discovered his identity 3 days ago, and who had decided to use his known location to draw a Navy vessel into an engagement in order to test response protocols for a much larger operation they were planning. In other words, Sarah's ship had been bait, and Asad had spent 3 days trying to find a way to reach them and warn them without blowing his position. When he failed, he did the only thing left. He put himself on one of the vessels, hoping someone on the receiving ship would look at him long enough to ask a question instead of immediately answering with fire. That folder contained 6 months of intelligence. Names, routes, quantities, dates, contacts, safe houses, and the names of 4 individuals inside official structures who were facilitating the operation. Captain Karami held it for a long time before he said anything. Then he said, "You held fire." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "Protocol required continued suppression." "Yes, sir." "You deviated from protocol based on a visual read of a hostile's posture from 120 meters in low light." She met his eyes. "Yes, sir." He looked at the folder again, then at her. "That was either the best decision made on this ship in 5 years, he said, "or it was an enormous disciplinary problem, and I haven't decided which one it is yet." She nodded. She had expected that answer. She respected it. The 2 vessels that had attacked were partially disabled. 1 had sunk. 3 of the attackers were recovered from the water and detained. 2 were not recovered. The legal process around the engagement, the use of force, the deviations from procedure, all of it would take months to sort through. Sarah knew that. She had accepted it before she gave the order to hold. This is the part of the story that most people skip past when they tell it later. The paperwork, the review, the 3 separate boards that examined every minute of that morning. The way the word unauthorized deviation from rules of engagement sat in an official document with her name next to it. The way her record, which had been clean and strong, now had a notation in it that would require explanation for the rest of her career. She did not apologize for it, but she did not celebrate it either. She had made a call that turned out to be right. She was fully aware that it could have turned out differently. If Assad's vessel had been carrying explosives, if the figure at the stern had not been Assad but someone who knew that standing with arms out was a useful 2-second delay, if the intelligence in that folder had been fabricated, any of those versions were possible. She had made a call in conditions where no call was perfectly safe, and the outcome had been good, and she would spend a long time thinking about what exactly that meant. Asad Mahmood spent 3 days in the ship's medical bay, not because he was badly injured. He had a cut on his right forearm from where he had grabbed the hull railing and a bruised rib from some point in the last 3 days he declined to describe in detail. He was in medical because he had not slept more than 90 minutes at a time in 6 days, and his blood pressure was reading things that the ship's medical officer described as technically survivable but aggressively stupid. On the third day, Sarah went to see him. He was sitting up. Someone had found him a clean shirt. He was drinking tea and looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a person whose body had stopped moving but whose mind was still running. She pulled a chair and sat across from him. Neither of them said anything for a while. "You stood up," she said finally. "It was the only thing I had left," he said. "I had been trying to get a signal out for 3 days. Every channel was compromised. I couldn't use the network's communication system without flagging myself. I couldn't reach my handler. I had about 40 minutes left before your ship would have been out of intercept range and the whole operation would have moved to the next phase." He turned his cup in both hands. "Standing up was the last option. I wasn't brave. I just ran out of everything else." She considered that. "It worked." "It worked because you looked," he said. He looked at her for the first time since she sat down. "Most people don't look, they process. There's a difference." She thought about that for a while, then she said, "The intelligence you brought, the 4 names." He nodded slowly. "How long have you known about them?" 3 months, maybe a little more." "Did you know before you went under?" He was quiet for a moment, then, "I suspected one of them. I went under partly to confirm it." He paused. "I confirmed all 4. She understood what that meant. It meant he had spent 3 months certain that people inside the structure were watching what was happening, which meant he had spent 3 months knowing that any signal he sent, any communication he attempted through official channels, could potentially reach someone who was paid to ensure it didn't arrive, which meant the 6 months of isolation and silence and operating inside an organization that wanted to destroy the thing he was trying to protect was not just the mission. It was the only way the mission could work. She thought about what that did to a person, carrying that kind of knowledge alone, knowing the walls might be wrong, trusting nothing except your own judgment and the integrity of your own silence. "Were you afraid?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Of the water, yes, I'm a terrible swimmer," he almost smiled. "Of everything else, I stopped being afraid somewhere around month 3. I think fear requires a certain amount of future. When you stop being sure you have a future, the fear changes into something else." She asked, "What does it change into?" He said, "Clarity." He held the cup still. "Everything becomes very simple. Either you finish the thing or you don't. Either it matters or it doesn't. The noise goes away." Sarah sat with that for a while. Outside, she could hear the ordinary sound of the ship, machinery and movement, and the constant faint background of the sea. The shuttle was heading back to port now. She had a review board in 4 days. Assad had a debriefing tomorrow that would take most of the day and possibly longer. Neither of them was finished. This, the ship, the tea, the quiet conversation, this was not the end. It was a pause between things. "The folder," she said, "the intelligence, what happens now?" "That's not really my department," he said. "I gather others decide." He looked out the porthole at the water going past. "I've learned not to need to know what happens after. If I needed to know what happened with every piece of information I gave them, I would have stopped a long time ago. You have to trust the chain. Even when you're not sure the chain is clean, you work with what you have." She nodded slowly, "And the 4 names?" "They'll be handled," he said, quietly, carefully, "in a way that doesn't signal what we know until we're ready." He met her eyes. "Which means if you're thinking about what you can say to whom about what was in that folder, the answer right now is nothing and no one." "I know," she said. "I've worked intelligence adjacency for 4 years." "I know you have," he said. "I read your file." She looked at him. "When?" "Before I came up. 3 days ago, when I was still trying to figure out who was on your ship and whether standing at the stern of a vessel moving toward you at speed was a workable plan or just the most elaborate way to get shot I'd ever attempted." She felt something shift slightly in the conversation. He had prepared. He had researched her. He had gambled not just on a random sailor making an unusual decision, but on a specific person's history suggesting she was more likely than average to hold fire for 10 seconds. "What did my file tell you?" she asked. He considered. "That you finished at the top of your class in tactical decision-making. That you wrote a paper at the War College on non-standard threat assessment in maritime environments. That 6 years ago you recommended against engaging an unidentified contact near Ormara that turned out to be carrying civilians displaced from a coastal flood. Everyone else had voted to engage. You were the one dissenting opinion." He paused. That last one was the one that mattered. She remembered that day. She remembered being the only voice in the room saying wait and the way the others had looked at her. The vote had been 6-1, and then the intelligence officer had confirmed the contact was civilian, and the 6 people who had voted to engage had simply moved on to the next item on the agenda, and she had sat with the strange, lonely feeling of being right in a way that no one needed to acknowledge. "You gambled your life on a 6-year-old vote," she said. "I gambled my life on a pattern," he said. "One vote doesn't mean anything. A consistent pattern of looking before acting when everyone else is acting before looking, that means something." He paused. It meant enough. She stood up. She didn't have a good closing line. She was not a person who looked for closing lines. "Get some sleep," she said. "I will," he said, "eventually." She left him there with his tea and the view of the passing water and the particular stillness of someone who had been running for so long that the absence of it felt like a different kind of weight. The review board convened 11 days after the engagement. 3 senior officers, full documentation, recorded proceedings. Sarah sat in a metal chair across a table from people who had reviewed the footage, the communications logs, the timeline, and the outcome, and she answered their questions with the same clarity she brought to everything. They asked her why she deviated from established protocol. She said she identified a behavioral signal inconsistent with a hostile engagement posture and made a tactical judgment to delay action by 10 seconds to allow for clarification. They asked her what she would have done if the craft had not slowed. She said she would have ordered full suppression and accepted responsibility for the outcome. They asked her if she was aware at the time that she was making a decision that fell outside authorized parameters. She said yes. They asked her if she would make the same decision again under the same conditions. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I would make the same decision under those specific conditions because I genuinely believed the risk of firing was greater than the risk of holding for 10 seconds. But I want to be clear. I am not arguing that I was right because it worked out. The outcome doesn't validate the decision automatically. What I'm arguing is that I made a considered judgment under time pressure with incomplete information, and the judgment happened to be correct." The board's role is to determine whether the judgment itself was reasonable, not just whether the outcome was good. The senior officer on the board, a rear admiral named Sadek whose face had not moved during the entire proceedings, wrote something on his notepad. Sarah could not see what it was. She looked at it anyway, out of habit. The board deliberated for 2 days. The outcome was placed in her file as a documented deviation from authorized row with a notation that the deviation was assessed as a reasonable tactical judgment under specific field conditions and did not constitute misconduct. It would live in her record. It would come up in future assignments. It would require explanation. She accepted this. She had accepted it before she gave the order. Assad Mahmoud's debriefing lasted 3.5 days. The intelligence he provided resulted in the disruption of a network that had been operating for nearly 4 years along the Makran coast, moving weapons and narcotics in quantities significant enough to have been contributing to instability in 2 provinces. The 4 names he gave led to investigations that were slow and careful and would take nearly a year to result in any visible action, which is the nature of investigations that involve people inside structures. You cannot move fast. Moving fast means moving noisily, and moving noisily means the wrong people hear you coming. Sarah learned about the outcomes gradually, piece by piece over the following months through channels that were appropriate to what she was cleared to know. She did not learn everything. She was not supposed to. The nature of her role meant she was one input into a larger system, and the system does not always show you the full picture of what your input produced. There was one thing she did find out directly. 7 months after the engagement, she received a message through official channels. Brief, professional. It said that the intelligence gathered during Operation Maritime Silence had allowed for the prevention of an attack on a port facility that would have resulted in significant casualties and disruption to civilian infrastructure. It did not say how many lives. It did not say which port. It did not say any of the names or details she might have wanted to know. It was signed by a name she didn't recognize from an office she had never directly worked with. She read it once, folded it, put it in the drawer in her desk where she kept things that mattered, closed the drawer, got up, went back to work. This is not a story about a hero who was proven right and celebrated. It is a story about a decision made in imperfect conditions by a person who accepted the consequences of making it and continued doing the work regardless. Sarah Reeves did not receive a commendation for the engagement. She received a notation. There is a difference. Commendations celebrate outcomes, notations document decisions. She understood the distinction and was not bitter about it, though she will tell you honestly that there are moments, late and quiet, when she thinks about the difference and feels something she doesn't try too hard to name. Hamza Malik remained on her crew. He never directly acknowledged the order to hold. But approximately 3 weeks after the engagement, during a routine inspection, he left a folded piece of paper on her desk that said, in his careful, small handwriting, "The second vessel's crew all survived. 3 are in custody. They have families," and nothing else. She kept that paper in the same drawer. There are questions this story does not answer. Whether the 4 individuals identified in Assad's intelligence were ultimately held accountable in a way that matched what they had enabled. Whether the network was fully dismantled or simply damaged enough to rebuild under different names and different faces. Whether the protocol Sarah deviated from was subsequently reviewed, and if so, whether the review changed anything. Whether Assad Mahmoud went back under or retired, or did something entirely different with the clarity he had described to her in the medical bay. She doesn't know the answers to most of these questions. Some of them, she has decided, are not hers to know. The work is distributed. The outcomes are distributed. You do your part and you trust that the parts connect, even when you can't see the connection. What she does know is this. On a morning in the Arabian Sea, when 3 contacts approached a frigate that had issued every correct warning and received no response, in the seconds when protocol and instinct diverged, she looked at a man standing at the stern of a vessel moving toward her ship, and she chose to ask a question instead of give an answer. And the question cost her 10 seconds and a notation in her permanent record and several months of professional uncertainty, and the knowledge that she had been right in a way that could easily have been catastrophically wrong. She is still serving, she is still making decisions. She still smells that particular metallic smell sometimes in the moments before things change, and she still finds herself looking very carefully at whatever is in front of her. Not because she is certain she will see the right thing, but because she has learned that looking carefully is not the same as knowing. It is the condition you create that makes knowing possible. And in a world where the next vessel approaching at speed might be a threat or might be the last card played by someone who ran out of every other option, the willingness to look, to genuinely look before you act, is not weakness. It is the most expensive thing you can offer, and sometimes it is the only thing that changes the outcome. The drawer in her desk has more papers in it now. She doesn't open it often, but when she does, she doesn't linger. She looks at what's there, acknowledges it, and closes it again. The sea outside whatever ship she's on continues moving. The horizon is always somewhere ahead. She goes back to work. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below. Tell us what you thought about that moment she held fire. Was she right? Would you have made the same call? And if you want more stories like this one, stories that go deeper than the action, that ask the hard questions about what it costs to make the right call, subscribe and stay close. The next one is already coming.